Welcome to another episode of Surviving the BPD Relationship Breakup Podcast. Information about BPD, understanding BPD inside out for anyone in any relationship type or who's been in a relationship of any type with somebody with borderline personality disorder. I'm your host, AJ Mahari, and I look forward to informing you and helping you to understand more what you need to do to heal and to take care of yourself. And I'm out here to work with you if you resonate with me. You can find this podcast website at ajmahari.ca, where you can also book sessions with me if you'd like to do some one-to-one healing work. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit about borderline personality, largely by those untreated, but could happen also with people who are in different places of the process of treatment. Borderline abuse. Why do people, so many, in various different ways, as they're not all the same, why do so many people with BPD, how can you understand why so many people with BPD act the way they do? Or more to the point, try to relate to you in the ways that they do that just are impossible and very painful and traumatizing. Well, BPD is rife with repetition compulsions. That's the reenactment of core trauma, which is really at the heart and center of BPD. So the first thing that happens, especially for the untreated person with borderline personality, because they do not realize in a really conscious way what's happening for them inside. And this is an explanation, there's no excuse, for BPD abuse. So first, the person with BPD will feel threatened. Well, what leaves a person with BPD feeling threatened? It could be anything. It could be something you say. It could be something that you didn't say. It could be the tone in which you said something. It could be what you did. It could be what you didn't do. Because again, people with BPD, in a rather youngish childlike way, not infancy or anything, but sort of like just being like a teenager kind of emotionally age-wise, they have this cognitive distortion that is a repetition compulsion also, that is not in their consciousness, more often than not if they're untreated, that you're just supposed to read their mind. Read their mind like a parent would read the mind of a child younger, say, than adolescents. So whatever they feel threatened by is what they feel threatened by. And it could be a trigger. It always seems to have to do with you, doesn't it? Or did if you're an ex now. But the fact is, it doesn't really. Because, there can be a little bit of cause and effect there, but the bottom line is the triggers are already inside people with BPD, and more to the point, untreated BPD. And they're from the past, and they often experience things in the here and now that stress them out, and they experience them as if they're happening, like they get triggered, emotional dysregulation, sometimes, some dissociation, not always age regression, and then they're experiencing whatever just happened, like what you said or what you didn't do or what they're upset about, what is really a perceived distortion of the here and now. Then in this emotional dysregulation, they're really experiencing the past or a past event or something from their childhood trauma at some point or other in the here and now. So they feel super threatened by something that the rest of us know isn't a threat at all. And then they lack the communication skills. They have communication deficits, lack of self to be able to express anything. So when they feel threatened, it becomes a reaction. It's immediately going to usually be behavioral in some way or other. This is where the abuse of others occurs. And again, people with BPD, not to excuse the abuse at all, to just give you some insight about it, often don't know how more often than not, especially untreated, don't know how they're actually impacting you. So this is why they could, suddenly explode in rage at you, and maybe that goes on for 10 minutes or 15 minutes or whatever various length of time, and then maybe you seek space or you walk away or there's more conflict, or sometimes people, BP, just settle down after that. And then they'll reapproach you, some, not all, and they'll be kind of like, can we do this now or that now, or what's going on? And they won't understand why, and then they'll feel abandoned by you. It triggers the whole cycle again because they don't understand how they've just impacted you, and they don't understand what you're feeling. And for people that just flow with this, like in the sense of, oh, well, now they're in a better mood, so I'm going to go with that, then you're just accruing. People are accruing anyways, but accruing even more and more trauma and woundedness, and you are just sort of getting your own stockpile of times they've raged at you or abused you in different ways. And then sometimes some people with who are in relationships with somebody with BPD, any relationship type, most having codependency, will just keep accruing things, and there are no closure to these episodes, whether you try to talk about them or not. So after abusing you, the person with BPD will feel like they're the victim. They just go from abusing you, not knowing the impact on you, to now feeling like somehow they were abused, they're the victim, which is projective, but it's also what they're experiencing inside that drives the unconscious, drives them subconsciously to erupt or burst forth or act out or do anything that's abusive in the first place, which is often not conscious. So there are times and situations where a lot of people with BPD do things that are abusive and hurtful consciously, but I'll be talking more about that to kind of talk about different examples and what's the difference. So this is just a general overview. And so then after they abuse you, they do go into the victim role. So in the Karpman drama triangle, they've gone from persecutor to victim. And you've gone from rescuer to victim. And now, when the person with BPD gets into the victim role again, they feel empowered. And it's like a false sense of empowerment, but it's overcompensatory. It's defensive. It kind of just makes them feel a whole lot better and a whole lot stronger, kind of momentarily or for a little bit. So they feel empowered, and you're feeling hurt, and you might be feeling confused and all kinds of other things, which likely leaves you feeling, whether you're aware of it or not, somewhat disempowered. So this is one of the ways to look at the cycle. And then when you feel disempowered, you've kind of toppled from the rescuer role to the victim as well. So might intersect for a time in a different way, the codependent and the borderline being in the victim role, and then the borderline going to the feels empowered, which starts to head back to persecutor, and the person with codependency from the victim is going to get back to trying to be rescuer. And this is just based on the repetition compulsions of not only those with BPD, but those who also have codependency. So why do people with BPD act the way that they do? So let's just look at this in terms of a basic overview. So people with BPD interpret reality according to what they feel. And this is really what magical thinking is, in a way, specifically within BPD. It's not the full scope of it, but what people with BPD feel is what they believe is real. And more to the point, they believe what they feel is not just real for them, but they think that's where they distort objective reality, because they don't really get to objective reality if they're untreated. So their reality, or their distorted reality, based on how they feel, is not shared with you and not something that you can figure out what's going on because it happens inside of them and there is no sort of objective reality between you and that person with BPD at that point or vice versa. So situations that aren't considered by most other people as threatening are perceived by people with borderline personality as threatening because the borderline already feels threatened. Feeling threatened, feeling unsafe, feeling unworthy, feeling shamed, feeling less than, all of this is just rather part of, well, it is essentially, absolutely part of the way that people with BPD feel. Now, inside. That doesn't mean that's in their conscious awareness, though. So comments that aren't hurtful or, rejecting, but they, that you might make, but they're perceived, as so hurtful and so rejecting because the person with BPD already feels all that kind of hurt and rejection. So these become triggers, and you're not really responsible if you haven't said anything mean or cruel, or provocative. Then you're, reactionary. Whatever you just say in the normal course of life, when they misperceive and it goes through the filter of the repetition compulsions and the unconscious, then they're going to come out with all this, rejection sensitivity and, oversensitivity and perceive this, that, and the other thing. And it really doesn't have anything to do with what you just said or did or didn't say or didn't do. So no matter how much care you take, no matter how many eggshells you walk on, no matter how carefully you try to attend to their every need just not to have something go wrong, you're trying so hard not to upset the person with BPD. But, people with BPD, untreated especially, are already upset. They are 24/7, some variety of upset or not, internally. And often, again, not known consciously to them. So why, after abusing you, or just in general, do people with BPD, quote, play the victim, unquote? Because are they playing the victim, or is there something deeper going on there? Well, in their mind, you become the enemy, and they become the victim. And so, with their lack of awareness and no self, right? Lack of self, having a lost self, they're precluded from taking personal responsibility and from understanding what personal responsibility means, and they don't get how you're impacted. So basically, they're triggered to the emotional dysregulation so easily, so often, whether they show it or not. Even a petulant or acting out borderline might not always show it. They might try to get along. They might try to be close to you. But there's so much going on inside of them that this is what I'm talking about when I say you really can't understand what drives their behavior or what's going on inside of them. Because it's not like when things are going well that they're at peace. No, they still have pain. They still have this victim mentality. They still are very not conscious of a lot of the things that they're feeling. So the issue with that, of course, becomes very difficult. How somebody's supposed to regulate and take responsibility for what they don't even realize they're feeling, and then they act out of those feelings, and then you're impacted, but they don't really have awareness of most of this. So again, an explanation, not an excuse for abuse. So people with BP are always going to think immediately or feel or react emotionally that everything is everybody else's fault because their defense mechanisms are in place to protect them from being hurt or blamed. And yeah, the question that's relevant here, I'm sure, for a lot of people is how's that working for them? It kind of doesn't work, and it doesn't work for anybody who tries to love somebody with BPD. But again, these are unconscious cycles of repetition compulsion, which means the reenactment of the trauma. So it's not all about the here and now very often, if at all, for untreated people with BPD. And they can't tolerate, like if you try to hold them responsible, they can't tolerate that either. So if they have a choice between what you're saying or what you're trying to communicate or hearing you or between themselves, they'll always choose themselves. Always, sadly, because of the repetition compulsions. The unconscious, like, they're just not consciously aware of this. And, you know, the way that they relate to others is really so driven by their feeling states internally projected out onto you. And then you become, in a difficult time or devaluing time, you become the object of their bad or wounding parent. And if things are going rather well once in a while, then you become the object representation of the good or parent never had. So how much do you think that you're getting seen in between those two realities? So it's really sad and tragic for everybody concerned. And people with BPD untreated who don't ask for it, you know, they get, 87% of them get severely abused in childhood. And it's not just what happens between the ages of 0 days old and 2. I mean, that's huge, yes, as to why they go on to have BPD. But often in the childhood of people that go on to be diagnosed with borderline personality, abuse doesn't stop at 2. And, you know, if they have a cluster B parent themselves, like it goes on throughout their childhood and beyond. So it just keeps layering. Everything just keeps layering on top. And all of the symptoms or signs of BPD continue to multiply or become more evident as a person goes from young childhood into adolescence. And then psychiatry is still reticent to diagnose before. Sometimes they do in the teen years, but they don't really want to diagnose until 18 or 19. But, you know, and then that's because adolescence is such a tumultuous time in any, you know, growing young person's life, as I think we can all probably remember to one degree or another. But I think that, you know, more attention needs to be paid to this because I think the patterns are much more ingrained and become much more obvious. So like I said, in some areas there are some, like even in psychiatry, in the APA there, in some places in the U.S., as well as other places, where they're starting to have adolescent, you know, treatment. And maybe they won't make the official diagnosis at that point. But, you know, borderline personality, what it really does mean at its core, creates a situation where no other choice is possible for people with BPD because it's not in their conscious awareness. And it comes from trauma. And it doesn't make it okay. So you become this enemy because they feel bad, and it has to be somebody's fault, and it can't be theirs, so therefore it has to be yours, and then they just externalize and throw that all out at you because they really truly do not, at least untreated, understand that what they're feeling has anything to do with anything inside of them. They think it's generated from outside, and that would mean the closest person to them. It's not a thought process. It's a reactionary one of repetition compulsion. So, can borderlines act selfishly and feel remorseful? Well, most people are aware, you know, that people with BPD can't really comprehend the selfishness, you know, that they display, and that others kind of can't comprehend the selfishness either, which is not wholly narcissistic, by the way, and it doesn't mean they have narcissistic personality disorder. So if you're living with somebody with BPD, you start to understand. You might not understand what's going on at first or for a while, but you start to see patterns. And then you're on the roller coaster ride, which you may or may not know, and you're starting to walk on the eggshells. And it can be, for people close to someone with BPD, an unbearable burden, an unbearable, impossible relational communication nightmare. but it's not the person who is the partner or the sibling or the friend, etc., of the person with BPD. And I really want to stress that a lot, because so many people in relationships and in the BPD relationship breakups think, well, what did I do wrong? Like, what if I did this? What if I only did that? What if I didn't say this? What if I said that instead? None of all that what-ifing and wondering. You know, if you would have done it differently, it wouldn't have mattered, believe it or not, because nothing matters to people with BPD from externally, from anyone else, because they get really internally focused, because they are trying so hard to deal with what they're feeling and what they don't understand, and so they're probably not even hearing you. So when you tell a person with BPD how their actions have affected you, they cannot understand what you're saying, and even if they do, it's not something they feel that they can control. And remember, they kind of operate on what they feel is real, and they're lacking the bridge to objective reality. So you might be talking about how you feel, and if only they could communicate or know more consciously what was happening for them, then there might be a bridge to some objective understanding. But there isn't with people with untreated BPD. And what is that? That remains as no closure to any conflict, any difficulty whatsoever. And that is very difficult it's difficult for people with BPD all along in their lives, but it's very difficult for those in relationship to, or any relationship type with somebody with BPD. And and they really don't understand, and that's something that people really, and then sometimes they might get it a little bit, right? And in an intellectual way, but that's not enough to be able to change behavior. And so if people with BPD have hurt, often, you try to do what you think it is they need so that this hurting and this behavior can stop, but it doesn't really work. And then there's a sense that this person is really emotionally fragile, perhaps. They feel they are constantly under attack by everyone around them, as they're usually or often untreated, attacking everybody around them and then projecting that out. And again, they don't do that consciously. And in their eyes, inside of what's going on for them, and it's true that there's selfish behavior, and the reason why they can't focus on you is because they're defending, the lack of self. But they're in their own cycles, not understood well by them, not understood well initially in these relationships. So people with BPD do see many things in extremely distorted ways. And they often believe things that are not true. And they will continue to believe these things even when the facts in front of them spell out the complete opposite. So no amount of arguing, persuading, the jade, justify, argue, defend, explain, kind of hours of conversation you're trying to get them to understand you, or logic, no amount of any of those things or attempts or efforts will change the person with BPD's mind, because what's going on for them internally is A, not really consciously understood by them, and B, it's not happening in their mind, it's in their emotional landscape. Repetition compulsion again, reenactment of trauma. Their negative lens, the lens of BPD experience that's so cognitively distorted in the here and now, has all to do with the fact that they're still in the lens of the past, internally, unconsciously. So people with BPD, we got to remember, they interpret facts or try, so they never really get to the objective reality that you're logically trying to explain. Like, they did thing A and you felt thing B, and now there's this and now there's an issue, right? To say the least. So, people with BPD can't take in the objective reality and what you're trying to reflect back to them, because they're just going on how they feel, and they believe, like, they don't know how to trust, and so they believe that you're just saying stuff to them to make them hurt more, even though you're really trying to accurately describe how you just got hurt. So it's that lack of objective reality. You can't really build a bridge there. So all conflict, anytime that the person with BPD is abusive toward you, you try to talk to them about it, it's like you're both standing on different planets or across a broken bridge, and the communication, there's just no bridge there. So there's no question of whether they care about people with BPD. There's no question whether they care about people's needs and well-being, because people with BPD, well, some people would say just aren't wired that way, but more to the point, it's the trauma, and it's the way that their past gets in the way, and it's what they're suffering, because they're basically in some kind of pain when they're untreated 24/7. It doesn't justify it. This is just to help you understand more that not everything they do, like much of what they do, is not aimed at you on purpose, is not trying to get you or destroy you, or, but it has its effects, doesn't it? So how you feel is as real to you as how much they can't understand why you're feeling how you're feeling, because they don't see the connection. And that's a really difficult thing to deal with, because this is why these relationships, especially with untreated borderlines, are really impossible, no matter how hard you try. So people can feel guilty after, a conflict, a situation, an episode of abuse, rage, withdrawal, whatever it might be, and sometimes to the point of being suicidal. But this varies across many different people with BPD, men and women with BPD, and it may be one of the only differentiating characteristics between, it's a major characteristic that differentiates between those with BPD and those with NPD. Now, there are other differences as well, but that's a major one, because they can feel guilty and they can feel remorseful, and doesn't mean they're always going to share that with you or that they know how to communicate that. And even if they do, it doesn't mean that they have anything in place that could change their behavior yet. That's why they need long-term treatment. And anything short of that, things are going to stay the same, even if you're recycling through a relationship again after a breakup or ghosting or whatever. So people with BPD are capable of remorse, not that it helps a lot in terms of coming back together or them understanding their behavior or their abuse, and narcissists are not capable of remorse. So the burden of people with BPD, or the burden it originates with people with BPD, but becomes your burden if you're the partner, in any relationship type with somebody with BPD. Because people with BPD, they do not understand the impact of their actions and or behavior and how they are hurting you. It's one of the hardest things for people living with BPD is, when they might start therapy or attempt to change, or they'll change the subject or talk about someone else's feelings, they're perceived as rejection and that the other person doesn't care. So again, it's like if you're not agreeing with them, then you're not reflecting back who they are to them, and that is an instant trigger. And it's not something that you're doing. It's their trigger inside of them already. And so if you, attempt to call them on the things they've done to hurt others or you, it routinely ends up with the person with BPD sometimes sobbing, sometimes screaming, they're not all the same, exclaiming that these things are just being said to upset them because they don't have the connection between what they've done, how you're hurt, now what you're talking about. So this type of response from people with BPD extremely hurts, wounds, and traumatizes loved ones, depending on the severity, but certainly in patterned ways and how long you're in the relationship. All of that woundedness and hurt and trauma accrues. And people with BPD are extremely dismissive of others' feelings. And the reason is people with BPD respond that way because they don't believe anyone else's feelings are real, because they're so overtaken by their own and they feel like what they feel is real. So there's no thinking there. There's no, there's no objective reality. It's all subjective inside the person with BPD. So you get lost to that. You're not seen or heard often due to that as well. So they simply don't believe how you feel. They simply don't believe what you're reporting to them, even though what you're saying is logical and usually way more correct than incorrect. They can't meet you in the middle of objective reality. So this isn't really about being manipulative to hurt others, but there's often not the intentionality on the part of people with BPD to do what ends up happening and what you're feeling and what you're going through. But like I said, I'll be talking more about this because there are times of more intentionality, and there are a myriad of times where people with BPD do not have this intentionality or this conscious awareness. So it's not pre-planned, it's not organized, it's not designed to get you or trick you or anything like that. So they can't understand that their actions may be hurting others, the impact of their actions on others, and especially when they're upset, triggered to emotional dysregulation, etc. So this is an area of overlap between BPD and narcissism insofar as the internal, what's going on internally, but again, not always consciously, and how they can't bridge outward to objective reality. So I hope that's somewhat helpful, because in this way, I think really, without knowing when I started to do this podcast episode, as I've talked about on my YouTube channel, BPD communication deficits, BPD impossible communication or communication impossibility, this would kind of fit in with the 2 videos I did on those topics, and there's a couple others on my YouTube channel. It fits in because this is people with BPD, especially untreated, their inability to be in objective reality in any sharing, symbiotic, synchronistic, present to the now way. So this is what I mean when I say people with borderline personality, repetition compulsion cycles, it's in their unconscious, it's trauma reenactment, but it doesn't mean it's okay that they abuse you. And you are never getting any closure to what's happening, and they're not really ever understanding or seeing or hearing you. And so what you have is a relational impossibility, the communication deficit nightmare on their part, and that they can't come to this objective reality that you are trying to, you're coming from your own reality, your own experience, but you know what they did, or what the perception of how you experience what they did is, but there's no way to have any closure of an episode or any kind of like agreement in the middle, because there's no objective reality for people with untreated BPD. And so that leaves loved ones and those with codependency, who are usually loved ones on the other side of the person with BPD, in vain doing a lot of talking, hours of jade quote conversation, etc. They can't meet you in the middle of objective reality. And that isn't something that they do with intentionality, malice, pre-thought out, pre-planned, or even conscious awareness. Doesn't make it any different, doesn't make it any better. You're experiencing what you experience, and your experience matters. And then, like I've been talking about, I'll be talking about more. I've been talking about a lot on the YouTube channel. I'll be talking about more on the podcast here, that people who are trying to, with codependency, fix the borderline, get them to therapy, you're enabling, you're trying to make this relationship work. Well, you have to remember, where there is no objective reality, where there are these communication deficits, where there is this relational possibility with people untreated with BPD, there's no love wherever there's abuse. And nobody should have to fight for love. And this is what people need to think about, because it's all really compelling, and then you're loving this person with BPD, and they're not even who you thought they were. So the question rises again, who are you actually loving, and what is that doing to you, and how stuck is that keeping you, whether you're still in the relationship, or it's a different relationship type, or you're an ex, or you've recycled through the relationship, you got ghosted, discarded. Because the reality of the trauma bond and its effect on people with codependency who have woundedness from childhood too, just not to the degree of those with BPD, well, it's just an overall nightmare. I know I don't have to tell people, of agony and trauma. And then the more you try to make it okay, and the more you try to fight for this, quote, love that isn't there in the first place, the more you're going to stay stuck, the more you're going to get hurt and traumatized, the longer when you get to it, your healing and recovery journey is going to be. So it's really important that people realize that these relationships with people with untreated BPD don't work out, and that you need to get out, and that you need to go no contact. And if you resonate with me, check out ajmahari.ca. You could book sessions with me. You could work with me in this healing recovery process. I've been helping people for 30 years. But the point is, people with BPD, they do abuse, not always consciously. It's not, quote, on purpose. But that doesn't matter, because you're on the other side experiencing the abuse. You're getting hurt. You're being abused. That's not love. And then people are trying to figure out, well, why are they doing what they're doing? But more to the point, why are you focusing on them instead of yourself? And why aren't you getting yourself out of there? Because, yeah, I know, it's a trauma bond, it's difficult, and you still love them, even though who you're loving isn't even really there in front of you, with you, or able to relate to you, or understanding their impact on you, and they're not even able to share objective reality with you. And that is, for people, abjectly, painfully, traumatically crazy making. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it gives you some insight, some food for thought. And as always, take care. And you've been listening to the Surviving the BPD Relationship Breakup podcast with your host, yours truly, AJ Mahari. You can find this podcast website at ajmahari.ca. I'm available there. You can book sessions with me if I resonate with you, and if you think you would find that helpful in your recovery journey from any relationship type with somebody with borderline personality. Please also check that website, ajmahari.ca, for a plethora of blog posts and more information. And please keep tuning in. And if you're not already subscribed to my YouTube channel, please check out youtube.com/AJ Mahari. Take care.